Okay, so this video lecture is going to talk about the heart blocks. First degree, second degree type 1, second degree type 2, and then third degree. Just the basics, just enough to kind of be able to recognize it on the rhythm strip, to be able to communicate effectively with your team during ACLS, and ultimately to help you communicate effectively with other healthcare providers in the event this is a real world emergency. So, first degree heart block, clinically insignificant most of the time, and it's just kind of a gee whiz thing. So your first degree block, and of course this is all in order of severity too, right? So your first degree block, basically you have your P wave and then your QRS, and then T wave. And it's not necessarily going to be bradycardia, could be, but it's not necessarily bradycardia. The important thing is the relationship of the P wave to the QRS complex. Because if you recall, for your heart, your P wave starts here, travels to the AV node, and then through the heart. So if there's some sort of a blockage along that conduction pathway, you're going to see a problem with your QRS or PQRS complexes. So first degree heart block, you want to look at your PR interval, and then in the last video lecture we talked about 0.2 seconds or a big box. Okay. So if this is greater than a big box, then it's a little bit of a delay in the conduction between the P wave and the QRS. So a normal, your PQRS just kind of goes right into that. And so it's within that one big box. But if it's first degree block, maybe it's a little bit beyond that big box. Okay. And on your in your books, I believe this is your number 8 is the first one there, yeah. And so you can kind of see how it's more than one B box. So that's on page 121 of your book. The strip A is your first degree, right? Mm-hmm. So you can see that the PR interval is a little bit bigger than one big box. Mm-hmm. And the important thing is it's the beginning of the P wave, not the end of the P wave, to help you determine that. But most likely that's not going to be in your test, and you just kind of know it exists, but you probably won't see it on a test anywhere. Secondary type 1, secondary type 2. Old school people would talk about Molbitz, Wenckebach, and all that other stuff. For ACLS purposes, just know secondary type 1, secondary type 2. So I believe you were talking to me before about what a secondary type 1 looks like, correct?
Yes, sir.
So how would you describe a second degree type 1 heart block?
The P wave progressively gets longer, so the P wave in
QRS?
in relation to the QRS becomes longer, so it goes, the way I remember it is long, longer, longest, drop. So exactly. The P wave gets a little bit longer each time, and then you have a drop.
Exactly. Make this a little bit bigger. So you have your P wave, QRS. I'm not going to draw the T waves just to make it clear. And then you have your P wave a little bit longer before you get your QRS. And then you have the P wave and even longer, get your QRS, P wave, and then it just drops. So you can kind of see, it looks like this distance here is getting longer and longer each time, and then it just kind of drops. Do you remember the type 2 second degree heart block? Any one of you? Anyone?
That's the P wave and the T wave start to merge or look like they merge.
Well, not quite. This one will look like a kind of a normal rhythm, right? The P and the QRS are fairly stable and consistent. It'll look like a normal sinus rhythm, but then you'll have a drop. Hey, go ahead and have a seat. So we're just starting with the blocks. Okay, so just to kind of review for our new student that just walked in, we're going over the different types of heart blocks. So your first degree block, clinically insignificant, your PR interval is greater than one big box. Your second degree type 1, you'll note that you have your P and your QRS, and it'll appear that this P and this QRX gets further and further apart, and then it'll eventually drop. Then it kind of starts back to where it was before. And it'll look like it gets progressively longer, and then it will drop. Your type 2 second degree block, it'll look kind of like a normal sinus rhythm. Your QRS, there's no delay in the intervals. The morphology probably all looks about the same. But then after a few beats, it'll just drop. And then it'll kind of pick up to kind of look normal again, and then it'll just drop. So sometimes, you might see 2, and then it'll drop. And then you see another 2, and it'll drop. So when you're looking at your strips on the test or in the book, that's the pattern you want to look for. Question?
This is actually regarding the first degree block. Were you saying for the first degree block, the box, are you saying the P wave has to fit in the box?
So
Or I guess the P...
the beginning of the P wave to the beginning of the QRS should be within that big box.
And if not?
Then there's a little bit of a delay in the conduction. And if that's the only problem, then you consider that a first degree heart block.
Oh, okay, got it.
Doesn't really clinically mean anything. You're not going to really treat that unless there's symptomatic bradycardia. It's kind of a gee whiz thing. All right. So now your third degree heart block means that instead of kind of like this progressive changes or intermittent blocks to the P to the QRS, there's a complete disassociation. So the atria are beating at their own rate. The ventricles are beating at their own rate. The rate that the atria will normally beat by itself is usually, let's just say, 80 beats a minute. The rate that the ventricles will beat by themselves is generally about 30 beats a minute, okay, approximately. So what will end up look like, I'm going to draw the P waves first. I'm not going to bother drawing T waves just for clarity's sake, because then it gets a little bit confusing, especially on the whiteboard. So the P waves are very consistent. The QRSs are kind of at their own consistent rate of maybe about 30. And there's no association between these P waves and these QRSs. Sometimes the P wave might be taken up by the QRS and it disappears and hides on you. Sometimes it might look like this second degree type 1 because it might look random and sporadic. But one good way to assess that is when you're taking yourself a piece of paper during the test, you can take this and you can put a little mark at the beginning of the P waves, and you'll just kind of follow through. And if there's one that kind of disappears inside the QRS, you just see, well, where that would have been, and then you go on, oh, there's that P wave again, and you're going to march out the P waves, and then you take your QRSs, and you're going to march them out, and you're going to see that those are consistent as well. And that's the best way to kind of see the P waves are at their own rate, the QRSs are at their own rate, and there's no appearance of this kind of second degree type 1 where it looks like it's starting to gradually progress before it drops. So those are the major heart blocks that you want to be concerned with for ACLS test. On the written portion of the test, that's when you got to be able to identify it. During the megacode, you're not going to be expected to look at the monitor and say, that's a second degree type 2. No, what you're more concerned with that is to be able to treat the bradycardia or whatever condition is that the person has, rather than to be able to recognize it during the megacode. But it's a good way to get a couple of questions right on the written test, just to kind of know this. Best thing to do if you can't really remember it is when you're taking your actual course, sit there and try to memorize it, and then especially before you actually take the test. And again, the test itself is all open book, and so if you know where the heart blocks are located in your manual, and you're taking the test and you're like, I don't know which one this is, flip over to the page that has your heart blocks and say, yep, that's secondary type 2, easy answer, move on to the next one. So just like real life, if you're running a code on a person for real, ACLS is open book. You'll have your little cards to help you out with, and then you'll have assistance during the actual